Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Lead Volunteers podcast. Most of you may not know this, but we do have these episodes on YouTube as well. So sometimes we're recording live here in my home studio, but sometimes I'm doing this remote. And when we do it remote, I'm bringing in guests and we're recording it. So you can actually go to YouTube. I remember a leader said to me, mind blown. I didn't know that there was audio. So we're grateful that you're here for the Lead Volunteers podcast. And we have a special guest who's coming back to us, the one, the only Doug Franklin. How are you, Doug?
Josh, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Oh,
Pleasure to be
man.
here.
Yeah, you're a good one. You've been around, you know what you're doing, and I'm grateful. So today we're talking about how to get volunteers to do what you need. Uh,
Yeah. The church is one of the greatest training organizations in the world that's really not that good at training. So,
right. Yeah, so like we're supposed to be about equipping the saints, and we really don't do a very good job equipping the saints.
yeah, and I think we struggle for a number of reasons, but one is I don't think we've been doing training very well over the generations, and so
Ah,
I think now we're really short on time. We don't get people for 3 times a week at church anymore, and so we're
so
really
true.
crunched for training time. And so we need to make 30 minutes of training work like 2 hours of training.
Yeah, I mean, let's go back in time a little bit. I remember a day when it was Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and Wednesday evening was like absolute mainstay, always going to be there. And that is totally different now.
Yeah. And I would say too is that 25, 30 years ago, people at church were grew up in church and had been trained through many, many years of Sunday school, maybe
Yes.
Christian school, maybe Christian college. And today, those people are not the folks that are necessarily always at church. And so you've got people that are serving who have maybe been a Christ follower for only a few years, or
Yes.
maybe grew up in a church that wasn't very Bible based or wasn't very discipleship oriented. And so I think that sometimes we're asking people to do a job they've never seen done before.
Right. And we're asking them to do that which almost was baked into the formula when you were a young kid. You just kind of grew up through the ranks and it's a different generation. So I'm excited. We're going to do real quick. We're going to develop this topic of how to get volunteers to do what you need. We're going to define it, develop it, and of course, we're going to ask you to help us. What would we do to kick it off? So first, why is it so hard to train adult volunteers? I think we've already hit on it, but let's tackle it again. I mean, it's time, really, isn't it?
I think what happens, some of what I've observed happening is this time pressure requires us to then dump everything that we have, right? So
Yeah.
we sometimes do I'm going to train you with 14 things I need you to do in the next 5 minutes, and it's like drinking from a fire hose. Nobody gets it. Everybody walks out and doesn't know what to do first. But I think even deeper level than that, Josh, is oftentimes we as leaders are so pressured by how much time we have with people. We try to do multiple things in every event. So I think church does 3 things. It reaches lost people,
Yes.
it helps people grow in Christ, and it sends people out to go and use their gifts.
Yes.
So what we tend to do, especially in youth ministry, which is kind of my area. So, we start with dodgeball. We throw balls at each other, and that's sort of the reach part of it, which is kind of funny that we throw balls at each other.
Right.
And then we break up into a discussion time, small groups. That's our discipleship. That's our grow time. And then we come back together, and the student leader band leads us in worship, and we got all 3 in reach, grow, go. And the volunteers are their heads are spinning. They just got off of work. They came out to help, and they didn't know if it was reach, grow, go. And
Right.
they just migrate to the side, and they're not effective because they don't know what to do. And besides that, we told them 40 things we wanted them to do, and they couldn't figure out which one to do first. And so I
It's
think
so
that
true.
oftentimes we don't simplify our training because we're trying to do too many things with every event.
Right. Not only just every event, but we're wanting to, since we don't have that much time, which we've definitely established, since we don't have enough time, and nobody's going to come to another evening meeting. That's so yesteryear, right? That's
Right.
1998 maybe. And people aren't going to come to another evening training. And so once we do have them there, we need to tell them to do something. But I like what you said. We get it. It's hard to train adult volunteers. But your perspective is doing just one thing, not 14 things. So kind of unpack
Yeah.
this. It's pretty straightforward, but
So
very few
when
people
we
follow it.
when we do an event that's designed to reach out to people who don't know Christ,
Mm-hmm.
I tell my adults that I want you to do one thing and one thing only, and
Mm-hmm.
that's invite. Walk around the room, get to know people, share your name, hear what their story is, and invite them to come back.
Yes.
Invite them to be your friend at youth group. Say, hey, if you come back, I'll be right there at the door. I'll meet you. Make sure they know that if they come back, you're there. You're inviting them personally, and then if it's appropriate, invite them to know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior.
Yes.
I mean, this skill, this idea is just one thing, and so. Like oftentimes I think like if we're going to do a youth event, let's put on the door a really big sign that says invite. Students won't know what it means, but
Right.
all the adults will be like, okay, I got one job tonight. I got to find students. I got to share my name. I got to get to know their name. I got to get to know their story, and I got to invite them back. And I think if we do that, I think that's just one thing. And I think our adults will go, I can do that.
Oh,
I'm
right.
in.
I agree. Funny thing is, it's kind of like, as church leaders, we're carrying around and doing a shotgun approach as opposed to a bullet approach with one, like we want you to do one thing. And then at the end of the night, one of the things that we have in kind of the lead volunteers ecosystem is metric for success, right? And a volunteer, in order to retain them, they need to know in their minds, wow, at the end of a night, did I hit a home run? Did I whiff it? Did I get a single? And if you have them just doing one thing, they can walk out and go, dang, I actually did that. And the kingdom moved forward, right?
Yeah. I have a friend, Mac Lake. I don't know if you've ever
I
heard of
do.
Mac
He's a
Lake.
great guy. I've interviewed him before.
Yeah, Mac's amazing. He has these cards, these training cards, and they're so simple. They're like if you're on the parking team at church,
Yes.
smile and say hello.
That's it.
And I love that because you're like, oh yeah, that's my main job is to smile and to say hello. And where are you going? Where can I give you directions to where
Yes.
you're going?
I would say it's not dumbing down the win, it's clarifying the win.
Right. Because most volunteers, they're volunteering because they want to have impact. They want
That's
to
right.
do something. And when we make it so hard that they can't actually see any fruit from their actions, I think for them, that leads them to go, you know what, at the end of this year, I'm just going to drop out.
Right, because they don't even feel like they're participating with their one and only life.
Right. But if they know the win is say hello, smile, and ask them what directions they need, and they do that, they walk off the parking lot going, it's a good day of ministry.
That's
I'm
right.
going to do this again.
Because
right?
they are a piece to a larger puzzle, right? And I think that, inside of the Lead Volunteers materials, one thing that I encourage is to have a name tag. And on the back of the name tag is just the absolute, like the three things, right? And then tonight, our only thing is to look in the eyes, use a name, and pray. That's all I want. Eyes, name, pray. And they're like, okay, I can do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what we mean by simplifying it.
Yes.
And I think for trainers, when we think about simplifying it, we think, oh my goodness, that actually takes a load off of us. If we can boil it down to one thing, that for us makes training a lot easier.
It does. The funny thing is, I was just on a call, a coaching call with a leader, and we were talking about job descriptions, and I said, if you actually get job descriptions right, you have your recruiting down, you have your training down, and you're likely going to retain them, because that if you have a succinct, boiled down version that says exactly what you want them to do, action oriented, like your training's done. It doesn't need to be this hyperbolic, elaborate intensity. It can be, listen, talk to a kid and ask them 3 questions tonight. By the way, I love your 1,000 questions things. We're not going to talk about that today, but that's genius. That somebody can go back on our last episode. That was revolutionary. I've actually used that with a training and just shared with people, that you tipped me off to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if we could, just one more thing that I think is a challenge for us is that I think a lot of our trainers think, if my volunteers would just watch me and do what I do, they'll be effective. And I think there's a flawed thinking in this, is that everybody is gifted in different ways, and your volunteers aren't gifted the way you're gifted.
Right.
And so they won't actually be able to just watch you and do it. And so I think that one of the things for trainers is they're going to be very disappointed to hear this, because it made things very easy for them. But at the same time, I think that it's something that we have to be awakened to, is that your volunteers can be wildly effective in the giftedness that God has given to them.
Yes.
You just have to unleash that.
Yes. And I think also modeling is good, but it can't stop there. I've often thought about, I am not a juggler. Doug, are you a juggler? Can you juggle? No, not even close. But when somebody juggles, they make it look so effortless, right? And then whenever somebody is seeking to teach somebody else to juggle, it is a series of like maybe 15 different small actions that come together to make this thing look so smooth. That's what we need to do, is when they're modeling, we need to break it down for them to the small things. But modeling alone is, hey, they're just going to watch me. It's never going to translate.
No, never. You can't be a leadership mimic, right? You can't do
Ooh,
that. It
let's
won't.
go
It
there.
won't.
A
It won't be
leadership
effective.
mimic.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like, it's like you get the latest Andy Stanley book and you read it and you're wondering why you're not Andy Stanley. It's because you can't do it the way Andy Stanley does it, right? He's a dynamic leader, dynamic communicator.
And he's
Uh,
been doing it for 30 years.
but I think there are people who read the book and try to implement things and realize they wonder why it doesn't work. It's just, being a leadership mimic won't work. That's why I think in volunteer development and leader development, it's really much better to discover how God has wired and shaped you and to live within that.
Exactly.
And what I find is that a lot of times leaders aren't okay with that, and that's a struggle too.
And I think the reason that they're not okay is because it's less comfortable. I might even say uncomfortable to let somebody else be themselves. It's like, no, 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 no. I want drones and clones of me.
Yeah.
And that's on the controlling side, and I think we need to get away from that. I remember a great leadership author we all know. He got out of seminary and listened. This was back in the tape days where it was a cassette tape, and he listened to this dynamic message, right? And after he listened to this message, he had an itinerant speaking thing, and he sat down and memorized the entire thing, like took time and rewound it and wrote it down, and then like rehearsed it like moment by moment that he could give this amazing talk. And he said it was the biggest flop in the world because it was the leadership mimic. He was trying to be somebody else, and everybody just looked at him like, and his wife was like, what in the world was that? Because a leadership mimic is never going to cut it. And I think that we need to allow people, okay, so it's like the North Star. It's like, here's where we're going. You be you. Let's get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking to a really sharp leader, and I asked how he got into working with children. And he told me he was an elder. And while being an elder, it was something that he really wanted to do. But while being an elder, he came to the realization that he wasn't really gifted for vision and strategy and
Okay.
long-term things. And you know what he said? I resigned being an elder and got my job back in ministry, student ministry. And I was so impressed with that, to go, okay, here's a guy who everything in church world says, be
Climb.
the, be the lead, be the head guy, right?
Yes.
And he said, no, actually my giftedness lied in serving our children. And I know there are great volunteers out there that are getting that, but I still think there's a lot of leaders that struggle with it.
I think so. And I think, allowing people to have a taste in ministry where, as you said, you're giving them one thing to be successful at. And then, of
Yeah.
course, then the next week, it's another thing to be successful at. And then the next week, we're only wanting you to do this one thing. And before too long, they have a palette of things that they could do, right?
Yeah. And I think too is we've got to consider the life of our volunteers. They come to events, to ministry nights already with the stress of family, the stress of work,
That's
all
exactly
kinds
right.
of different things, and their mindset may be the argument they just had or the tough day at work they just had. And I think when we say, now we want you to do 14 things, they go, oh, just overload, right? Like, so if we can just get one thing, what I find is that when volunteers have one thing to do, they do it.
That's so
And
good.
that is the key, right? I find that when they're overwhelmed, what they do is they move to the side walls and they talk to each other.
Exactly
And
right.
so a lot of times when I'm evaluating a ministry, the first thing I look at is, where do the volunteers stand? Because where they stand tells you a lot about the health of a ministry. So I think that I think if we want to get our volunteers to do something, give them one thing to do and train them how to do it and make it very simple. So, in this invite thing that we were talking about at a Reach event, what I'm going to do is I'm going to help my adult volunteers understand how to ask good questions of students.
Yes.
Students have a favorite subject, and it's themselves. And if you can help them talk about their favorite subject, they will tell you stuff, right?
You're in.
And that builds a relationship, and a relation leads to an invitation to come back. And so, when we train on this, we teach this. I find that a lot of my adults go, I can do it. I can do this. This isn't that hard. And then with a simple reminder of the event day, they're off and running.
For sure. And the interesting thing, we all know this intuitively, but Barna just came out with, I'm going to call it a groundbreaking study that showed how critical it is. I think there's like 80 different points on this survey, and the data is overwhelming. How important having another adult other than mom and dad, and likely other than the pastor, who is in their life, their likelihood to stay committed to church, stay committed to Christ, to all of these things come down to having an adult that knows them. And so if you can train an adult, tonight's thing is this one thing that is always geared toward relationship, I think people are going to have a far greater win. It's if I could say one more thing, you brought up that we don't think about volunteers and their lives. Now, I'm typically going to be the only one waking up at 3 a.m. thinking about my ministry. They're waking up a lot of ministry leaders think, well, this is the totality of their life. This is a big thing. No. This is your big thing. They're waking up at 3 a.m. thinking about their banking job, you know what I mean? Or whatever. And so then when they come into our ministry, we almost need them to do the shaggy dog, shake all of the water off from their day and have just a focused moment to not blow them out of the water, but as you said, to do just one thing.
Yeah, and I think that's what they want to do, and then that'll give them some wins. And if they get some wins, then it's really neat. Like a big win that I'll see between a volunteer and a child or a student is trust. When trust is built, like there's that moment when a student says to an adult volunteer, "Hey, could you pray for me? I got a big chemistry test." Right. What does that demonstrate? It's a fear in the student's life. Chemistry, which we were all afraid of pretty much. And, well, you weren't.
No, I've actually got a degree in chemistry. I love that you shared that.
But the rest of us were terrified, right?
If I had my other camera hooked up, I could click a button and show you that I actually have a periodic table on my wall. Who does that?
And you're the only guy.
The only one.
But when a student shares that with an adult volunteer and says, "Would you pray for me?" That's trust. And trust. I'm thinking today with what all the changes in student culture, all the statements in children's culture. I mean, children's culture is really this amazing development that's going on in 4th, 5th, and 6th graders right now.
Totally different.
The most valuable asset that we can have is trust between a volunteer and a child or a student. And so I think that developing that is such a key win. And when you get that win, for volunteers to have that moment where they're given trust from a student, it's just very motivating.
Now, here's the tough part too. I have seen a whole bunch of leaders, Doug, who say this. Okay, let's say that they grab onto this idea. They listen to the podcast. They're like, okay, man, I got my one thing, and they say, okay, I want you to go build trust. It's like, that's pretty amorphic. And so we need to make it hyper specific about the one step that is going to bring us closer to the goal of trust. Because say,
Yeah.
hey, I want you to build trust. That's not going to work.
Right. So this is what we talked about in the last podcast. So I don't want to repeat too much, but we talked about the fact you could have a level 1 relationship with a student. You
That's
get to
right.
know their name and their face. And then you get a level 2 relationship where you learn something about their fears, feelings, and faith. And the only way to learn something about their fears, feeling, and faith is to ask them questions. And knowing that they like to talk about themselves, this is pretty simple to do. But what I tend to do with students to build trust is ask them a lot of questions about themselves and
Yes,
listen.
that's
And
right.
then remember the answer and then go back to them next week and go, hey, I remember you were telling me how much you enjoyed the Pittsburgh Steelers. How'd they do this weekend?
Right.
And
Right.
for doing that with students, what I find is that accelerates very quickly relationship with them
Yeah.
and accelerates trust. I don't think students care about age. I don't think they care about size. I don't think they care about a lot of that. I think they care about authenticity
Yeah.
and does somebody really love them? And I think there's so few people in their lives that do
I
that.
agree.
We stand out.
We stand out. And, so as we close this off, what I want to ask you is where would we go? Where do we start? Like with this one thing, right? So tell us where you would help us land the plane with this. And even like maybe a list of, we can come up with together, a list of a handful of the one things.
Yeah. Well, first I would do is I would, as a leader, I would clarify the purpose for the event. So if we're doing small group night, I would say this is a night where students come who want to grow. Not the night where you come to throw a ball, to be in the band, to see that girl you like. This is a night you come because you're serious about your relationship with Christ. And that night we would do just one thing. What I see is because of this time pressure, we as church leaders try to fit all 3 things into a night.
Right.
And that is confusing to our adult volunteers. And that breaks down our do one thing, right?
It
Because now I
does.
got to do 3 things, right? So first and foremost, what I would do is I would have one purpose for every event. And
Right.
I would clarify that purpose on the calendar. I would tell every stakeholder, church leaders, parents, volunteers, students, this night is a grow night. If you come this night, you're coming because you want to deepen your relationship with Jesus Christ.
Right.
And then what I would do is I would train my adults what to do at a grow event. And when I had reach events, I would train my adults on the one thing I wanted them to do at a reach event.
I
At
like
a
this.
go event, I would train them on the one thing I would want them to do. And it's funny, on the go events, the training is get out of the way, right?
Right.
Because we're so used to rescuing and solving problems for students and making it easy for them that training is actually a really difficult one. At least it's been my experience that to train an adult to say, I don't know, what do you think, is almost like it's just very difficult for
Yeah.
the adult to do.
It's almost impossible.
Right. So that's what I would say. I would say one is clarify the purpose for every event,
Yeah.
and then communicate that purpose, and then train adults on the one thing you want them to do at those events. So at a reach event, I would teach you to invite.
Right.
In a grow event, I would teach you my process for discipleship. I have a 5-step process for discipleship. If it was a go event, I would teach you how to help students get the most out of a leadership experience by not answering questions that have answers that they can find. But if there's an answer they can't find, train them how to do something and tell them the next time somebody asks, I'm sending them to you. So teaching just these 3 things that they need to do makes an adult go, I could do youth ministry. I only need to know 3 things. I could do that.
In addition, those types of events, those categories of events are going to be coming back around. You're going to you don't have 14 different types of experiences. You for your
Right.
ministry and your kind of mental schemata, you have 3 big buckets and you're training people how to do a particular thing to reach a goal for this particular type of an event. So I think it's clarity. It's simplifying in its clarity.
Josh, here's the hard thing I'm going to say. If you notice in this system, the problem is not the volunteer, it's the leader. The leader makes it too complicated. The leader doesn't communicate. The leader. So oftentimes when a youth pastor says to me, Doug, my volunteers just don't get it. The answer is You don't get it. You're not getting what they're doing. So what I really want to say to leaders is this is a huge problem, and I'm sure you feel a heavy weight about this. But your actions can actually change things versus complaining about your volunteers. Your
Right.
volunteers are only doing what they see other volunteers doing and thinking they're doing what's right. So here's the thing: change it around. This is a practical tool, I would say.
Yeah.
Well, close down your ministry 1 week every year. Or 1 week even every quarter. I know some people have done it. Tell your volunteers to come. Send your kids or your students home with something fun they can do with the
Sure.
family, at the
Sure.
they can do with the family, and use the time that you would have done youth group, or you would have done children's ministry, or you would have done, well, you can't tell the people not to park in the parking lot, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
And use it to train, because you're better off closing for a week or two every year than you are continuing to run a mediocre youth
Yes.
ministry.
And I would say to that those people typically have that particular night already blocked off.
Right.
And so it's like when teachers have an in-service day. They're
Right.
already there, and you're
Right.
not asking them to come on a Saturday. It's just not going to happen. So I've never heard of that before. I think that would be good to say, okay, it's like to the kids, it's like, okay, this is a gimme night. Here's what you're going to do outside of here. But everybody, then you do have that maybe once a year or twice a year, quarterly, a real concentrated time to hang with your volunteers. That's great.
We started promoting this idea to our partner churches about 7 years ago, and the response has been amazing. First of all, a lot of pastors said, "You crazy? You can't do that." And then actually, when they started to think about the fact that they already had the night, they were already focused, and they could bring parents into this, send it home, send something home with the students, so the parents have a night where they're like, "Boy, I really appreciate youth ministry."
Yeah, yeah.
Bring the parents into it. But closing will make you better.
I
And
like that
I
concept.
have never had one of our partnering churches ever say to me, Doug, we did it and it wasn't beneficial. Never. I've never heard that.
I like
All I've
this
heard,
idea.
because the minute your volunteers hear that you're closed to do this, they're going to go, "Oh, this is important."
Right. Like they are
Right.
sacrificing an opportunity with kids to make us better.
Yeah.
This is a
And
powerful one.
run it by your church leadership, obviously,
Of
first. But
course.
but I'll tell you this. I say just try it. Just try it once. And it's a money back guarantee. I don't think you paid any money, but it's a money back guarantee. It works. Close.
Well, this is fantastic. Well, as we kind of close out, why don't you tell us just briefly about you and your ministry and just kind of share a little bit about who you are and what you guys do?
Ah, well, Leader Treks, our mission is to develop leaders to fulfill the Great Commission. We're focused mainly on preteens and student ministry.
Mhm.
And I like to say it this way: we help church leaders make disciples and develop leaders. And we have curriculums, year long curriculums, we have weekly curriculums, we have all kinds of resources. One of the things I think we're known most for is that we do student leadership assessments that are written in students' language and written from a biblical perspective. We do we do trips, mission trips, all kinds of different things. But
Yeah.
realistically, our heartbeat is we want to help youth workers have a thriving youth ministry, and
Yeah.
we think that one of the things that we've noticed over many years, so we've been doing it for 30 years, is that a lot of people are in pastoral ministry because they're great with people, great with students, great with children, but they don't necessarily have all the tools that they need to make a vision and then create a strategy from that, and from that strategy implement the programming that makes that vision come to life. And
Right.
that's what we do. We come alongside a lot of pastors and say, okay, what's your vision? How do you want to do that? How do you want to create a strategy? We help them create a strategy, and then we fill in a lot of things that they need. We know they're the heroes. We come alongside and help them.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are making the difference. And we've got a great group of people that work here, all past youth workers, and we spend every day doing what most youth workers don't have the time to do.
And you're
We're
and so yeah, and so you're building and resourcing youth guys and youth gals where they're like, I just don't have time to do that. And so you're providing those things. I really appreciate it. Thank you again. I'm excited to connect with you. You and I have a call coming up soon just for us to hang out and talk. So I'm excited for that. Well,
Good.
again,
I love talking to you.
yeah, it's fun. Well, gang, this has been just yet one more episode of the Lead Volunteers podcast. We're grateful that you guys have been here with me and Doug. And I just want to say we're grateful. We'll catch you guys on the next one.